Hi, Jiffin. Good evening. Hello. I think my voice is low. Hello. Jiffin, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Sid.
Okay. Am I too quiet, or is it you can hear me well?
Yeah, I can hear you. Well. It's clear for me.
Okay. Okay, good. Um, yeah, so Michelle said she joined today. She's been reviewing the CAP. Um, um, so there were only a few comments left, so we should be able to address them. Ben looks like he won't be able to join. We have a new member. Hi, Grant.
Hello.
Hey. And we have Aaron. Hey. So we can get started. Right, let me open up the CAP back to where we left off. Hi, Michelle, are you here? I see one account by the name SIG Storage.
Yes, that's me.
Hey. So while this loads, it seems like maybe there's only one or two issues um, that were really big questions. One of them is multi-protocol within a single definition. So I want to discuss that and make sure we all agree on an approach forward. So either way is really fine for me, having multiple protocols or having a single protocol. But the conversation that happened last time about single protocol versus multi-protocol was simply that if you have the same thing can be achieved with a single protocol and multiple buckets. So let me, for those who might not be familiar with what the discussion is, yeah. So this is the question that I'm trying to answer here. So in the definition of a bucket, protocol is not an array. It's a single string, and in providers like GCS, Google Cloud, buckets support both GCS protocol and S3. So so the question came up: shouldn't we have multiple protocol definitions within a single bucket? And our reason, our answer to that was, it's not really needed. We can have a copy of this bucket with a different protocol for whatever it supports. The idea being, if you port this bucket from one provider to another, which supports, say, only one instead of two protocols, it'll be easy to invalidate one bucket and then keep the other one valid. It was just a more natural model for protocol itself. Um, there is nothing inherently wrong with having multiple protocols in one bucket. Um, that's pretty much where we, how we came up with having a single protocol. Now, Michelle was asking in the CAP, wouldn't it be better if we had multiple protocols within one bucket definition? So I just want to open this question up to the people here in the community, and find out if you had any thoughts on this. If not, I'm just as happy to move with multiple protocols if it'll help push things through. And if we get it wrong right now, it's okay. We're still only in pre-alpha state. We can always fix it.
Yeah, so maybe I can spend just a quick time just explaining sort of my thoughts around this. Because I think the original reason was about portability, but I think my understanding is this bucket object is actually not supposed to be portable, because the bucket object is going to contain a handle to a provider-specific implementation. And so I don't think you could take a bucket object that is tied to, say, GCS and then copy it to like AWS, for example.
Right.
It's the claim that should be portable, but not necessarily the bucket object.
Right. Right. So when we say portable, we meant more in the sense that so there are cases where we do copy the object. We meant not, when we say portable, we meant more like um, not not the general, not portability in the general sense that we talk about in the Kubernetes community, where we want the same definition, the same user defined YAMLs to be reusable in a different environment. What we meant here was more like, if you're just moving from one provider to another, um, managing these objects is simpler, is all we thought. uh, but I get where you're coming from. um, uh, the bucket resource is really not user defined. The user shouldn't even know that it exists really. um, and so their definitions, their bucket claims and access claims, they're not going to be affected if you have multiple protocols here. So I get that, and I agree with you. So we can move to that model, having multiple protocols. um, I don't think there's anything wrong with it.
Yeah, I mainly think that because there's also some challenges to if you have, say, multiple objects that actually represent the same entity, that
Like deletion.
that makes cleanup and ref counting a bit harder because it's you can't no longer assume that a single bucket object refers to actually a single bucket on the back end.
Right, right. uh, yeah, but yeah, we had ways to deal with it, but you're right. This is simpler in that sense. um, so we were going to have each object individually, or a controller look at each object state in the backend individually. um, and so we didn't need some sort of ref counting there. um, we don't really do much about uh, in terms of preventing, I would say, preventing deletion. um, well, other than if some workload is using it. So I see what you mean. um, yeah, it does make ref counting a little harder. um, you're right. I think our answer to that was simply just enumerate all the objects and group them together if they use the same bucket. But yes, this would be simpler. Okay, so we can update this. There is so we can do it right away. um, Other than that, so Shing was mentioning there was some part of the KEP where we wanted to be more like PVCs and snapshots. I can't fully remember where that was. um, Michelle, does it ring a bell?
Yeah, I think the same thing popped up to me too. Um, I think it's where in the bucket access claim.
Hmm.
I think right now we're saying if you want to support the brownfield case, you directly access or you directly specify the bucket name in the bucket access claim. But that's it's pretty different than how we do that support brownfield for PVC and snapshots.
Right. Yeah. So the reasoning there was, um, it's really not owned by any user if it's a brownfield bucket, because it wasn't created by them. Um, in general, deletion of bucket claim is expected to delete the bucket in the backend. Um, I guess with retention policy, like we'll have to enforce retention policy. Uh, so in case of PVCs and PVs, if a PVC manually, or let me go back a step even. So talking to Ben, who has been involved in the snapshot thing, um, he seemed to suggest that uh, the old way of binding PVCs and PVs, where PVs are created independently and PVCs bind to them, um, we wanted to get rid of it, if I understand correctly. or we didn't want to follow that model anymore. We only wanted to go with dynamic provisioning. Is that right?
I'm not aware of this conversation, but
Okay.
I mean, things would be a lot simpler if we didn't have to support brownfield cases in general.
Okay. Okay. So the reason I was bringing it up is doing brownfield where we go where the bucket access points to the bucket claim and the bucket claim points to a bucket is similar to that manual binding process that we were doing with PVCs and PVs, where PVCs are created initially, or PVs are created initially, and then PVCs are bound to them. So one of the issues with that was the binding was based on, I think, storage requirement, and the user was not expected to know which, or user couldn't know upfront which PV would bind to it. I don't think we have that problem with buckets, because we expect the user to know specifically which bucket they're getting access to. The only question comes up around deletion, where if should we delete a bucket if they delete the bucket claim?
So the way we handle it with both PVCs and snapshots is by default, if you create the PV object manually, the default reclaim policies retain. And only if it's dynamically provisioned, we set the reclaim policy to delete.
Got it. Okay. So if we create a bucket, we can follow that model. If we create a bucket using where if a user creates a bucket claim and it leads to the creation of a bucket, we can go with something like delete. But otherwise, we're saying it should be retained. So there is another use case. So currently, the way we use buckets that were created in another namespace. So say namespace one creates a bucket claim that ends up creating a bucket. And if you want to utilize this bucket in a different namespace, we follow the same as the brownfield approach, as in the bucket access claim, bucket access points directly to the bucket instead of going through a bucket claim. The implication here is, I guess all the other bucket claims, other than the one that created the bucket, would have to have retain policy. But if someone were to set it to delete, then it can lead to the deletion of that bucket.
Yeah, I think this is one of the challenges, right, of having like multiple objects represent the same thing. Like it's possible to set conflicting policies on them.
Right. And how do we deal with it in case of snapshots, or does that problem exist in snapshots? And I can't think of how that would yeah, in PV PVCs also.
Yeah, it also exists. I think we just mainly say, I mean, bucket is a admin level thing, so we kind of leave it up to, documentation and, trust that an admin should know what they're doing.
Okay, if that works with PVCs and PVs, yeah, there's no reason that we can't expect the same here. Okay, so we can do that. We can go through a bucket claim whenever a bucket needs to be accessed, regardless of it being brownfield or greenfield.
Yeah, I think that will also help in the future if like we want to add something like quota or like some other like quota or some sort of like enforcement of access control or anything like that. Having the same object for both brownfield and greenfield, I think will help in the policy enforcement.
Yeah, I see what you mean. Yeah. So okay, so
can I ask a clarifying question here? I did miss like a little bit of this conversation. Like it's my memory of like working with PVCs Like, I guess it's possible to create like multiple PVCs that point to the same PV, but generally, like if there is one PVC that like wants to be mounted by multiple applications, then those applications each use that same PVC, right? So is that also the model that we would be following for COSI, is that there is one PVC and that PVC is referenced by like all consumers?
Something like that, yeah. We'll have only one bucket claim, likely per namespace, and we'll have multiple bucket accesses. So each bucket access corresponds to one, I would say, service account or credentials, one set of credentials. So it's possible that people create it that way, where there's one bucket claim in a particular namespace for a bucket and multiple bucket accesses. So it's kind of the same model. A bucket access is the reference to the bucket that ends up fetching the credentials and putting into the pod.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's how it'll be.
Right. I mean, it was I'm sorry, I did miss the like first part of this conversation, but it seems like I think Michelle is listed as SIG storage. Is that right? On the like.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry.
Okay.
Let me change my name to not confuse people.
It seems like you're suggesting that we do away with bucket accesses and only have like bucket claims. Is that my understanding?
I'm saying for the brownfield case, I think we should also go through the bucket access claim and bucket objects. But we still need
okay.
the bucket access for controlling like read and write and other permissions like that.
Okay. Okay, that was my understanding, or my misunderstanding. I'm sorry. Gotcha. Okay, yeah, this is just about the brownfield case. Yeah, I mean, I think that probably makes an amount of sense, that there must be a claim for a bucket, even if it's a brownfield one.
Right. Yeah, it's it'll make sure it's consistent regardless of if it is brownfield or greenfield. Yeah.
So Sid, like, so I can understand like we need claim, but who need to create it? Like, with admin will create it, or like admin will create the bucket and user need to send a request to claim it on his namespace or something like that.
That's a good question. So how will a user namespace know that there's a bucket that they can consume? And the current, let's say we were going with the old model where bucket access was directly referring to the bucket. That problem still exists, as in they'd have to know what bucket they want to get access to. So I think it's reasonable to say that the user has to create the bucket claim in which your namespace they want to access the bucket.
Okay.
I guess kind of follow-up question from that is, does this prevent users from what is I'm trying to remember, like there's a good name for this, but like there's effectively like a thing you can do with like web pages where you just basically like try all of like the various hashes to like see what user data exists in something that is like otherwise opaque to you. Like,
Right. Mm-hmm.
Is it going to be possible for users then to be like, does this bucket exist? Does this bucket exist? Just by like creating OBCs? Like, is there a way to force the brownfield case to only be allowed by a specific user, so that users don't like have the ability to effectively just like guess what buckets might exist and then get like ownership of them?
So yeah, that's a good question too. So we do have restrictions. So before I get into that, so we the way we do access is namespace scope, not user scope. The reason being, if one namespace has access to a bucket, pretty much all, if one pod in a namespace has access to a bucket, pretty much all the pods in that namespace have access to the same bucket, because it's assumed that within a namespace it's free for all. Um, a user that can access uh, that has access control enabled at the namespace level, or there is no user access control restriction at a level more granular than namespace. So
So I don't think that's true. I think
uh,
you can create users that don't have access to everything in a namespace.
is that possible?
Yeah. I mean, there's like, when you create a namespace, there's like a default user for that namespace, and that user will have like all the permissions to the namespace, but you can create additional service accounts or other users and don't give them everything in the namespace.
In the cluster role bindings and the cluster role definitions, it's not possible to restrict at the namespace anything lower than the namespace level.
You can have a role binding that specifies specific resources.
Right. So so the idea is if someone has access to a bucket in well, you could get the so is it possible for a user to be restricted from, say, a specific config map? It's either they have access
Yes,
to all config maps or no config maps, right?
you can, in the role binding, there's a field for resource names, and you can specify specific resources.
Really? Last we checked, it wasn't there. Maybe it was a year ago. Um,
Yeah, double check role bindings. But there is this resources name that lets you further restrict to specific resources.
um, we
But it's resource types only, or
Resource name.
oh,
So it might not
cool.
be, it might not be in
Oh
like
yeah,
oh, there it is.
page. Oh, here we go. Okay.
This is new.
Yeah, I didn't see that the last time I looked either. That's really
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's very useful.
I guess I think I might be asking a slightly different question. Like I guess specifically kind of asking around brownfield buckets. So like, you know, let's assume that like an administrator wants like users to be able to like consume buckets through Cozy that they previously had manually created. Or like maybe let's assume that like the administrator has like a special bucket that they have created that they keep, you know, some information that they want to have, whatever it is. Is there a mechanism that prevents users from making brownfield claims at random to like, you know, if the administrator is like, this is my bucket, you know, that I, you know, store all of the information about all the users that are allowed or whatever.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that users can't just be like, I think it's probably like admin special bucket, and then like
Right.
make a brownfield claim for that.
Yeah.
I think
I
like,
can explain how we do it for snapshots. Because I think the snapshot model for brownfield and this brownfield model for buckets are very similar. The way that we do it for snapshots is we require the admin to explicitly acknowledge that a user is allowed to access the bucket, or sorry, the snapshot. And the way that we express that is in the snapshot content object, which is the admin scoped object. The admin has to specify which namespace and which snapshot claim object is allowed to use this bucket, or sorry, allowed to use this snapshot.
Right. We're coming up with something very similar here too. So currently, in the current model, we say that nobody outside the creating namespace can access a bucket. So bucket sharing isn't possible. But in the next version, what we're saying is we're coming, or we're going to go with the last discussion. What we decided was to have a policy on the bucket that restricts buckets to certain namespaces alone. So the policy can say same namespace that is in the namespace that was created, all namespaces or anyone can access it, or based on a selector, you can choose which namespaces get to use which buckets. So that's the level of access control we have over who gets to use a bucket. So even if someone were to guess the name, this restriction would prevent them from using it.
But I guess, how do you tell? Like a bucket doesn't have a namespace on it.
No, we're going to add this. We're going to add this as a bucket sharing policy as a field in the next version.
I guess like my point is a bucket in the back end, like if because I deal with Ceph, so like let's say a bucket that exists in Ceph doesn't have a Kubernetes namespace associated with it. It's just a bucket in the object store. I'm concerned about any user being able to create a bucket claim for a brownfield bucket that has a pre-existing bucket in the back end. There is a possibility, I don't know if it is ruled out by the current design, but there's a possibility in some worlds where the implementation would allow the user to be I'm going to make a bunch of brownfield bucket requests to try to discover and get malicious access to buckets that actual backend buckets.
So it's not possible to create a bucket. So bucket claims can only be used to create new buckets. If the best you can do is refer to an existing bucket object, okay. But you can't use it to specify a backend bucket directly.
Okay, so it's still a requirement that the administrator would have to create a bucket for the backend bucket, and then a bucket claim for that brownfield bucket. Okay. I guess I could have asked that question before and gotten my answer first. So thanks for your patience.
Of course, you can ask as many questions as you need. Yeah, there is no need to even apologize. We can. Okay, so I hope that answers that question. But coming back to namespace level access, so we've always worked with the understanding that we don't need user level bucket access control. We've always scoped it to the namespace. Now, I think we can. How about this, Michelle? We can proceed with this model for this version, and we can reopen it and constrain it further for the next version, because I would like Ben to be here. Ben kind of wanted to, or he had some good points about why namespace level bucket access control is all that's needed, and it'll be good if he's here when we make changes to it. And he's not available today, but to proceed for now with the alpha version, do we need a stronger access control model, or can we work with this for now?
What do you mean by stronger?
As in, do we want to control access at the user level rather than just the namespace level like we do?
No, I think that's fine. That wasn't a huge concern for me. I think my main concern was having the bucket name in the bucket access claim object. Mm-hmm. Because that one basically just lets you kind of do what was being discussed, which was guess at bucket names.
And just get access, yeah. I mean, bucket claim can still do that, but yeah, I see what you mean.
I mean, so the way that we do it for snapshots is not only does the user have to say which snapshot they want, the admin has to also say what user or what claim is allowed to use that snapshot. So it needs explicit acknowledgement from an admin.
Mm-hmm. Understood. Okay. So yeah. So there. So we already. So we did decide. I think during the course of the meeting, we will change our method to always go through the bucket claim, um, to address that concern. Um, yeah. So uh, so I felt like protocol and following the more intuitive snapshot model, um, for accessing buckets, where two of the main concerns. Is there anything else that you think we should address during the course of this meeting? uh, one of them that comes to mind is you wanted to call them driver methods instead of provisioner methods. So all of the gRPC calls today use the prefix provisioner create bucket or provisioner grant access. um, yeah, it's just I think we can change that to driver create bucket and driver grant access and so on. So just wanted to bring it up and confirm that we can change it. Is there anything else that you wanted to discuss during the course of the meeting? Any other, I would say, um, uh, important concerns or anything that you felt like was
Uh,
very important? Yeah.
I think one more thing I wanted to discuss was having the bucket claim request like what protocol and what IAM or what authentication method they want to use.
Right. Where the user specifies, because the application is the one responsible um, for working with the style. That was a portability concern. As in, if we move from one provider to another and the second provider didn't support, say, a particular IAM or authentication method, uh, then these wouldn't be reusable anymore. So let's go here to.
Yeah,
So,
I think my sort of argument is that these two fields are very relevant to the application because the application has to actually be written, to handle those different features, right? So even if like the application needs to know, like this is information that the application needs to know and actually needs to like code against.
so initially,
So if they move to a provider that doesn't support those features, like their application is already not portable and they have to make changes to their application to support a different provider with different features.
agreed. So initially, I wanted to go with this approach, but the argument that came up was storage class today doesn't is where you specify something like file system. Um, let's say your application relied on a particular file system feature. Um, Currently, you don't get to say it in the PVCs. You'd have to specify it in something like the storage class. And the reason file system was put into the storage class was portability again. As in, if you move from one CSI driver to another, where the same file systems weren't supported, then you'd lose portability of the PVC. So I I I I wanted to go this way, where because it's the application that knows what they can work with, the application should or the application the DevOps person should be able to specify that this is the exact authentication method they want. Um, but in case of buckets, the and pretty much every bucket client, object storage client, they're always designed to work with all the access authentication methods. So if you look at the official clients of GCS, AWS, any of them, um, they're designed to work with all of them, all the access or authentication methods. Um, so we didn't see that as a big risk where an application is looking for only a particular type of access or a particular or a particular type of credentials, and it doesn't get it. Um, that being said, there is still that problem. If someone particularly writes an application where they're looking only for access keys and secret keys, and we can't provide it to them, um, then yes, the application wouldn't really be usable in that environment, even though the YAML definitions are technically working. But our thought to that was it's okay to ask the application to also support a new method in that case.
Yeah, I guess I wasn't aware. So I think you brought up a good point that the client libraries today already can seamlessly handle the difference between IAM or key. So that was something I wasn't aware of. So I think I am less concerned about needing to expose like the auth method. But I do think that protocol is still very important that needs to be specified by the application.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if you're supporting multiple protocols. Yeah, the application would have to say which exactly it wants. It's a requirement now. Yeah, agreed. We need it. Yeah, I can add that. All right. So just in terms of change that we need to make, it's protocol changes, which is having multiple protocols in a bucket and having the protocol name and the bucket claim, and two is with always going through a bucket claim and not directly going to a bucket object if you want to gain access to it. Um, Talking about protocol, so let's say we want to create a bucket that supports multiple protocols. How would a user go about it? So right now, the protocol field is defined in the um, bucket class. So if a user wanted access to a bucket that supported a particular protocol, um, they'd have to choose the right class to gain access for that protocol from that bucket. So if we move protocol into a user-defined field like bucket claim, so let me ask you this way. So it wouldn't just be a protocol field in bucket claim, right? It would be a list of protocols, right?
If the application can, has the ability to automatically detect and use different protocols, then I guess a list would work. I was kind of assuming that an application most likely would only have one SDK built into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I mean, there might be some theoretical wrapper that switches between various SDKs, in which case then an application could technically support multiple protocols.
Right. I also was asking this in terms of bucket creation. So in creating a bucket, when someone creates a bucket claim, would they specify all the protocols that it should support?
In the bucket object?
In the bucket claim object.
So I think the way I think of like what you should put in the bucket claim is this is what the application needs. And it would be, I think in terms of the protocol, it would kind of be an or, right? It would be like my application can support the AWS protocol or the GCS protocol. So you can give me one of those two, but it doesn't have to be both.
So
I
like
see.
in that case, like whether it makes sense to include it in bucket access than bucket claim, like the access is the last point. I mean, say bucket claim have all the lists similar to bucket, and in the access if you mention which protocol or something like that, would that make sense?
I think my thought was that if we're like dynamically provisioning something, it would be nice to fail that immediately if we know the provider cannot support the protocol that the user's asking for.
Right. So yeah. So the confusion here is, so how would they design an application that can work with something like an OR like that? So let's say a user requests a bucket which supports GCS or S3. Um, so their application would, I mean, while requesting access to that bucket, would they say the OR again? So while creating the bucket, they would say OR, either or, and when accessing the bucket, they'd create a bucket access object for it. And would that object have all the protocols or one of them? How would that look?
Is the access needed at the, like, do you need to have the requested protocol in the bucket access claim?
I mean, that's the point. That's the point of reference for the application. So the bucket access is what goes into the pod. And yes, absolutely, we need it because access control is defined in the protocol. So S3
But
access.
the application also has they can access the bucket claim too.
Technically, yes, but it's not needed really.
Like they need to do, the application needs a bucket claim in order to even have a bucket appear in the first place, right? And then
Oh, so
bucket access is mostly about saying, give me read access or give me write access to this bucket.
so the difference here is, so that's where we differ from PVCs and PVs, I guess. Uh, with PVCs, when you claim a PVC, it's a claim to the actual drive or underlying storage itself. Whereas with the bucket, um, a bucket is inherently meant to be multi-user. Um, so gaining access, or we don't actually provide the underlying storage into a pod. We just give credentials and the endpoint, um, as a key value set of key value pairs into the pod. We just mount that into a file. So that same model doesn't apply here, as in the bucket claim is just a claim to create a bucket. A bucket access is what the pods would refer to when they want to gain access to that bucket.
I
So
see. So you're saying it's possible you could have a case where like you have multiple applications that want to share this bucket, and maybe one application needs GCS and another application needs S3.
right.
Yeah, then I guess in that case, you still need the protocol in the bucket access claim. I guess the question is, though, at provisioning time, do you still need it? I mean, I think for
Right.
me, it's mostly a matter of like, how early can we fail? But I
Right.
guess, it's okay if we fail post provisioning
Yeah,
in
that
that
would
case.
work. Yes, that would work. So to summarize that, then, while creating a bucket, they wouldn't have to specify the protocol in the bucket claim. What they would do is they would refer to a bucket class, which has a set of listed protocols, and the bucket would get provisioned if any one of them is supported. Now, when someone wants to access the bucket, they would say they want to access this bucket by a certain protocol, and if that protocol isn't supported by the bucket, it's rejected. If it is, then they get access to it.
Yeah, I think that works for me.
Okay. Yeah, I think that
Yeah.
works. That's
If
okay.
you have if you can put down like a example of that, I think that would make things helpful to kind of understand why it's done this way.
I can do that. Yes. Yeah, I think that cleans up. I think that cleans up the model. I think that's a good approach. Okay, Michelle, I want to do whatever it takes actually to make sure we um, get it through today. Um, I mean, as much as I can do from my side. So yeah, I'll address these issues and update the cap as soon as possible. Is there any other concern that you'd like us to address now?
I think that is probably fine. I guess I'm wondering, so like, today is supposed to be the like enhancements freeze for Kubernetes, but since this is out of tree, we don't really need to like follow those dates, is my understanding.
Yeah, it would still be good if we can, hit this deadline. Um, I think what happens is after the enhancements freeze, there's a period where it's very hard to get in touch with reviewers. So we haven't been traditionally or historically successful with going outside of the regular cycle. So we're trying to be aligned with it. That's why we are
Okay.
hoping. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think I personally don't think we need to stick with the schedule, but like I'll definitely try to watch out for the updates that you have, and I'll try to look at it like today or
Thank you.
tomorrow.
Thank you. Yeah, that'll help. Okay, so is there anything else anyone wants to bring up? All right. Okay. So we have 10 minutes left. I don't have anything else. We can end early. I'm going to jump on fixing or updating the cap right away, and as soon as I update it, I'll post it on the SIG storage cozy channel, and I'll also send you a message, Michelle, if that's okay. Um, um, just so that you know that it's updated.
Yeah, sounds good to me. I am not good at keeping up with emails with GitHub notifications.
Okay. Yeah, I will. Yeah, I'll send a message on Slack. All right. All right. Thank you, everyone. That's all from me.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
thank you.
This is great progress.
Thank you. Bye.